Hey, welcome to Gold's Garage in Northern Ontario. It's December the 3rd, I guess. Welcome to the north. So, got to get the door closed here. So, in this series of videos, what we're going to do for you is sort of based on popular demand. There's the block from Paul's 355 that started off to be a budget repair. Now it's a complete new rotating assembly. Bored the engine, bored the block, decked the block, did all those things to it. And we're going to take you through the entire process from prepping the block to final assembly, running it on the test stand, and if I can talk Paul into dynoing it. This is the engine that has the angle plug 292 heads, the aftermarket Chevrolet heads that were the hot heads in the 70s before all these aftermarket aluminum head guys showed up. And so they're pretty unique. And so I'd like to dyno it because the previous two engines that I built, the compression ratio is the same, the cam specs are very close. The only difference is they had Promex heads. This has got the 292s. How much difference does that make? So one of the things I want to talk about before we even unload it, we just got it back from Atchison Machine. They do a great job for me as usual. And that main cap, by the way, is just an old main cap off another engine that I use just for handling it. We're going to unload it for you, and we're going to go through the process of prepping the block, even painting it, and all the checks that we do to put it together. But one of the things I want to talk about first is I'm going to tie this into my previous video on project management, because one of the important things is if you do a project like this, you got to get work done that you can't do yourself. So that means you got to deal with machine shops, jobbing shops, outside contractors, whatever. And so you got to manage that also. And I had a part in there about about that in this project management video that we actually titled "How I Blew Up My 302." You might check that out. It's doing pretty good. About managing that process. So first of all, my rule of thumb is I don't like paying anybody to do anything that I can do myself. And I've been like that all my life. Why? Because I couldn't afford to pay anybody to do anything that I could do myself. And if I had to pay people all my life along the way, I wouldn't have got to do a lot of things that I did back when I was younger and making $1 an hour at a Texaco service station. So I've always tried to be a DIY guy, no matter whether it's building my shop or my engine. I try to do as much as I can. So when I take it to the machine shop, what I start off with is request for quote. And in that request for quote, and I've got both the documents here, I just got it back from Atchison's. Request for quote, you define exactly inclusions and exclusions, what you want to do, and what your expectations are. Communicate any information to them that you need, and you ask for a quotation. And that's not an unreasonable request. It's a fairly significant amount of money to spend. And your interaction with your machine shop is not a social event. It's a business transaction, and you should deal with it that way. So I asked for a request for a quote. And so in my case, because I can do it myself, one of the instructions on the quote is do not install frost plugs, do not install cam bearings, do not install oil plugs, do not chase threads, all those kind of things that I can do myself. So the block's clean, but it has still lots of prep work. And if I had just given them open book on this, they would have done all those things and I would be paying for it. But I can do it myself. Now, you have to decide what you can do yourself and what you can't, and be reasonable about that. Cam bearings is a good example. If you haven't got a cam bearing tool, then you're going to have to pay somebody to do your cam bearings. And it is kind of a process that takes a little bit of skill, and it's not tricks, but make sure you got 5 cam bearings, you can't afford to ruin one of them, because if you do, you're going to be buying 5 more. So those kind of things. So you got to use your judgment in that. So what that also does is, when you bring the block there, I give them a work order saying, as per your quotation. That defines what they're going to do. And they don't have a right to do anything beyond what's specified in that work order, unless they call you and they say, hey Al, your crankshaft's cracked or whatever. And things like that can happen. Or you need to fix this or fix that you didn't contemplate. You want us to do it? Yes. Then you're part of that solution and you're happy to pay for it, of course. But it's just a matter of managing the process. It's not that you don't trust them. I'm lucky to have a great machine shop in Atchison's. They got great guys there that take good care of me. Not a problem. But you still have to manage. It's a business transaction, like I say. It's not a social event. And whoever you're dealing with, if you're going to do this, especially if you're going to do it more than once, try to create a good relationship with them, a business relationship, but a good relationship of trust, and you'll have better results in the outcome. So we're going to stop this clip here. We haven't unloaded it yet, obviously. It's snowed on the way home. Good thing we had it wrapped in plastic. We'll protect it. We'll get it on the engine stand, and the next thing we're going to do is prepare it for paint, and I'm going to show you a process that I use for that. Okay, we're back. We got Paul's block out of the truck and got the plastic off it. It was snowing. Good thing we had it covered. Nice and shiny, brand new. So the first thing I'm going to actually do, after I tell you to like and subscribe, because Alec always has to tell me, first thing I'm going to do is paint it. I want to paint it before I get my grimy, oily hands all over it, and then it's going to make hard for paint to stick. It's nice and clean right now, okay, and we're going to show you how we set up to paint it. We actually primer it as well. But a couple things to note. I mentioned in the previous clip, do as much as you can yourself, and you might not want to do this, but I take it there with all the oil plugs out, and I put all the oil plugs back in. All the cam bearings are out, I put them back in. Frost plugs are out, I put them back in, and hopefully that saves me a little bit of money. Now, I don't work for free either, but I'm sure my rates aren't anywhere near a machine shop. So typically, there's another reason to do that. I like to do it myself because then I know how it gets done. So here's one little, we'll call this the tip of the day, because I'm going to put all the oil plugs back in. I'm going to show you where most of them are. But there's one typical oil plug that I'm sure quite a few people don't know about, and that is in the block. The way the oil system works, of course, I don't even have the main caps on. The oil pump drives oil into this hole right here, okay? And first place it goes, if there's a plug there, goes out this hole here. It fills the filter from the outside, and the inside of the filter there's another hole in the bottom of the block. So there's a plug between those two in the block in this location. So I took it out before I went to the machine shop, and they don't put it back in because I tell them not to. But that's something you have to be aware of. If a machine shop takes it out and no one thinks to put it back in, when you start up your engine, you'll probably have oil pressure, but it won't go through your filter. It'll go bypass the filter and go directly to your engine, and you're going to have unfiltered oil. Because you have to keep filling that volume in your oil filter as well, and there's no pressure on the other side, it might actually reduce your oil pressure a little bit too. But the main thing is, here's one way to tell, and here's where this plug comes out on your block. Right here, where your oil pressure gauge goes. So if you can put something like this all the way down, you know there's no plug there. And that's one, if you're getting a block prepared somewhere, unless you're planning to put that plug in yourself, one thing that I suggest that you check. So going back to how the oil system works, if you want to come right over on here, I'll look at the top. So there's three main oil galleys. The top oil galley is this one here. On the other side is the holes that go to the cam bearings first. There's an annular ring around the cam bearing, and then the main bearings. So this small block Chev is not priority main, it's priority camshaft. The camshaft gets the oil first, You can't see it here. And then the plug is at this end. Now, then the ones on the sides just feed the valve lifters. There's a hole in each of the lifter bores, and they just feed the valve lifters all the way along from each side, and that's where the oil pressure comes for your valve lifters, goes up your push rods, your rocker arms, all that kind of stuff. That's how it gets oil there. So one of the things that's pretty common for most guys that prepare engines is these oil plugs are not tapped from the factory. They're just a plug that's pushed in. And then sometimes you put a little crimp behind it to hold it from coming out. And actually, when I read Jenkins' book that I bought from Bill that I hadn't seen for many, many years, Jenkins' comment is, I've never seen one come out, so I don't bother threading them. Well, on the other side, it only takes a few minutes to thread them if you got a tap. They're just a 1/4 inch pipe tap. And well, one of the things you really got to watch for, if you're going to do this yourself, this is how you can get yourself in trouble. There's a little hole right under here. You can see the annular ring. So how oil gets to your camshaft, it comes into that annular ring around the outside of your crankshaft, goes around your outside of your camshaft, and then continues back down and feeds your main bearing. So that oil comes down that tunnel to your camshaft, and of course the little holes in the camshaft bearing are to let the oil the camshaft itself, but the main reason is to have the oil to feed the main bearing. So this hole here is pretty close to the front of the block, and if you're not really careful, when you go to tap a thread in there, that plug is going to block that hole off. And if it does that, what it's going to do is going to block off the oil flow, not just to your cam bearing, but your front main bearing, and you're going to have a bearing failure. So one of the things, and I'll probably try to show that in a later clip when we do that, is we put a little bit of oil in there, and we make sure we see the oil get to the bearings, and we're sure that it gets here, goes around the annular groove, comes back out, and gets to the main bearing. That's critical and something you have to do. So we're going to mock up, show you how we prepare it for paint next. It's nice and clean right now. We just got to protect the bores to make sure they don't get rusty. In this case, the main bearing caps didn't need any work, so I took it to the machine shop, and I took the caps off before I took it there, and so we'll put them back on, of course. And after we get it painted, get all the plugs back in, we'll start the assembly. I'm going to try to take you through as much detail as we can. So the next step is painting. So when I'm going to do any painting, the first thing that I cover is my Camaro, because if I ever got paint on that, it would not be a good day. So how we paint the block, this block's been hot tanked and jet washed and all that. It's nice and clean. I like to paint it first before I start working on it, because I'm going to get my oily fingers on it and the paint's not going to stick. So one way to mask it off is I got an oil timing cover that I'm not going to use, an old oil pan that I'm not going to use, so that's used to masking. And in this case, the heads are cast iron heads, so they're going to get painted too. Now if you have aluminum heads, don't do that, obviously. But if you got cast iron heads, they need to get painted anyway. I've cleaned them all up good with a lot of different things, and finish off with brake clean and compressed air to make sure they're nice and dry. And so we're actually going to paint it outside and then bring it in right away. This is an old valve cover I got that I use for masking. The only problem is I can only paint one side at a time, right? But with that on there, I can kind of go for it. I don't have to worry about getting overspray on anything. And the first thing I'm going to do is primer it. So this is one example. There's lots of different kinds. High heat primer, 2000 degree primer. So that should be, if it gets hotter than 2000 degrees, we're in serious trouble. So primer the whole block first, and that'll make your paint stick better. Primer it, and then go to lunch, and then paint the other color after it has time to cure a little bit. So just wanted to show you that. The other thing I haven't mentioned, I guess if you haven't been following, the block itself, this is Paul's 010 block. It is a 2-bolt main block, so we just got it back from the machine shop. We had it bored 30 thousandths of an inch, and we had it decked 20 thousandths. So we want to get a 40 thousandths quench height. So the pistons that we buy, we're buying rotating assembly an Eagle rotating assembly, and the pistons come with a shorter compression height, which gives you 45 thousandths of an inch from the top of the piston to the top of the standard deck. So we take 20 thousandths off of that. Now we're going to be 25 thousandths. We're going to use a 15 thousandths stainless steel shim head gasket, and that's going to give us our 40 thousandths quench. So that's the plan, board, and then we'll come back to you when we get the primer on and show you what it looks like. Okay, we got a Coda primer on this engine, high temperature primer. I'm actually going to, because it's the time of day, I got things to do, let that primer set overnight. And the longer it does, the better it's going to be. And then we're going to paint it Chevrolet orange. What else, guys? So, and in this case, which I don't usually do, I painted the cylinder heads with it because they're Chevrolet cast iron cylinder heads, so they got to get painted anyway. So it actually made it easier to mask it. Masked off, that's just an old cover, once again, just used for masking. An old valve cover, which for masking, and that's how we got that done. So tomorrow morning I will paint this Chevrolet orange, and then we'll start putting in the frost plugs, all the oil plugs, drill and tap for the front plugs, and get this engine ready for assembly. And the next step is we will actually have the rotating assembly tomorrow. It's not here yet. It'll be here tomorrow morning, and we can start measuring up the crankshaft and getting ready to get this thing together. Please like and subscribe and hang in there with me. We will try to cover off as much detail. I got Alec back now. He's got a nice tan. He came back from the Caribbean, all rested, eager to work. So we're going to make lots of video this week. Much detail as we can for you with this engine. Thank you for watching Gold Scratch.